Hi, and thanks for joining us again for Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Joined again today by my co-host and fantastic counterpart, Bob Graves. And to this week, I was I'm hoping to be more articulate than I have been for the last couple sentences, but I've been hoping to carry on with the conversation that we had in the last week, and we sort of ended with it about crime and some of the perceptions that people have of crime, the realities of them, and our prison systems in general. I know that this is a topic that it gets talked about to some extent, but usually in a more pejorative and negative sense. We talk about criminals and we talk about the negative aspects of the crimes that are committed and the reasons that they're there. But I know it's important to myself. It's also important to Dr. Jones, as he has had some guests on his show and people in his home that he has helped through this very process. But the ideas of what prison is for, what crimes really are, and what can best be done to improve our society in general. If we take a look at the way that we define these things and the way that we treat these people. So with that, Bob, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. It's good to be back with you, and I'll tell you, I just need to say it again that I've really been enjoyed being a part of your show, and I like the interaction we have, and I really appreciate the fact that we're both really able to come from a theistic and an atheistic standpoint, that we can do that, and also have a meaningful time discussing these things. So it's good to be back, and I appreciate that. Also, in terms of what we're talking about, it's so disappointing to me that it seems as though we're stuck where we mix certain ideas together that really need to be separated. For example, are the people who commit crimes worthwhile human beings? And how must we regard some of the behavior they're involved in? It seems very difficult for us to be able to separate these issues so that we're either hard on crime and hard on them, or we're easy on crime and easy on them, when what we really need to do is find a way of being very, very clear on how unacceptable certain behaviors are, the consequences that must be owned as a result of them, and yet regard the people who are engaged in this kind of behavior as being people who, for whatever reason, have gone so far astray that even they may have lost sight of their own value and worth, and that our best option is somehow to find a way of getting them grounded back again in a responsible sense of both self-love and concern and care for the society they're a part of. And I don't get the impression that anybody's much interested in doing both of those. We either want to be easy on, well, let's, give them a break and cut them some slack. And I think the people who do things they shouldn't do need to face the honest consequences. But the consequences need to be redemptive and proportional and related to their crimes. I just, it strikes me as being something where the focus is just all off. And it's as if we don't really want to solve this problem. We just want to posture ourselves so we can feel like we're either being nice people or being appropriately tough on crime. And, I think it all doesn't work for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that that's a fantastic point, that it's way more about I don't want to resum what you just said, but um, I couldn't agree more that it really comes down to how we look at the the entire package and what we want to do um, uh, with what we hope to accomplish with our actions on it. I wanted to make just a small mention of why I feel this is appropriate to talk about on this show. It's something that somebody brought up to me after the show last week, is that talking about things like gun control and crime and punishment and things seems odd to do on a show that originated talking about religion, philosophy, theology, and things of that nature. That they couldn't see the connection as if the two were tied in any way. I could give you a few statistics that say how very how we could very literally tie these together. Things like less than 1% of the prison population is atheists, even though atheists make up 3 to 5% of the general population, and particularly for the age group that comprises the prison population, they make up an even larger percentage. So right there, the idea that atheism leads to bad behavior or anything, I mean, we could talk about that, but that's not the goal here. The reason that I want to say that this is appropriate for a show of this nature is that this show is about things that are worth discussing and about questions that need to be looked at more closely and answers that need to be scrutinized more closely.
Could you
Whatever
repeat
realm
that
that may fall
statistic
in.
that you gave before? I didn't quite catch it.
It's less than 1% of the prison population is atheists, even though atheists make up 4 to 5% of the population. Or if you look at the number or the particular demographic that comprises most of the prison population, atheists actually make up a larger percentage of the general population than that. So atheists are underrepresented in the prison population in that respect. But again, it's a play with numbers. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the prison population is a place where there is a huge incentive for finding Jesus because that helps you get paroled, and it's a huge incentive for attending church services because it's something to do. So
it's similar to the foxhole conversion, you know.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's similar to the foxhole conversion dynamic, you know.
Right. Yeah, and that's the idea that there are no atheists in foxholes or that there are no atheists in prisons that's not entirely accurate, but there certainly is a coercive force of sorts that can get people to accept things that they wouldn't accept normally outside of those situations. So you can certainly see how that this is a multifaceted issue that has far more to do with it than simply do atheists commit more crime than theists. As a matter of fact, anybody who's worked in the prison system or has talked to people in the prison system, most people coming in are not people who regularly attend churches or are part of a religious community. Most people who are going into prisons would self-identify as not really having any religious affiliation while going in. But the question is more, as far as atheists are concerned, do you believe in a god or gods? Then do you affiliate with a religion? So it's it's not really an issue. I guess I just wanted to talk about yes, there are ways we could tie the question into the show or into the theist atheist dynamic, but specifically, I just think that it's an important thing for us to talk about in general. The continue the conversation that we had last week and how it naturally evolved to that from gun control into crime and punishment.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
It seems to me that a theist and an atheist could both have very different reasons for wanting to actually support the exact same approach. As a theist, one who believes that human beings are created in the image of God, it seems to me that a redemptive approach to crime is very consistent with a theistic approach to the belief of creation. And I suppose that one of the reasons why that doesn't is because it's a very common religious belief that human beings are disgusting, sinful creatures and that God can barely tolerate the stench that we create to his nostrils. But on the atheist side, it would seem to me that if we believe that we are in a world where we're evolving and entirely on our own, that it would make the wisest sense to make sure that we're creating the best seed to the future. And this can only be done by seeking to minimize the damage. Excuse me. Minimize the damage and be redemptive, you know?
That that's a fantastic point. I love that. I realize that I say that a lot. This being a live show, I'm going to go off script a little bit and comment on my own performance. I apologize for responding to you so frequently with that's a fantastic point, Bob. I feel sometimes like I do that too much, but it is. You make marvelous points, and specifically that one I thought was a really good one. In the I have to say to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Welcome to the network, Alan Darley, who did his first scheduled show this week of his own. It's, I believe, entitled "Good Reasons to Believe." That airs at 10 a.m. I believe. I didn't get a chance to watch it. My wife brought me with her to church this morning. I went to Catholic Mass, so did not have the opportunity. But I have to say that I love having discussions with Alan. He was the first guest that we had on this show, and he really brought a different perspective to the table than you or I bring. And I think that one of the things that Alan and several other very Gnostic theists bring to the table is the idea that atheism leads to inevitably nihilism, and that there's the only possible or the only rational view of atheism is that life is meaningless and worthless. I think that what you just said spoke to a complete alternative, because you absolutely hit the nail on the head. I know that when I'm gone, I'm gone. So one of my biggest goals is to make sure that I leave the earth in a better place than I received it in. At least on the small scale that I can. So, in that respect, I very, very much have a passion for redemptive policies and practices, specifically in the prison system, and for using it as a tool to improve society, not to simply lock away those that would seem to be harmful to it. Does that make sense?
Sure, sure. And historically, one of the things I found to be very vague, in fact, I'll be honest with you, I have not been able to really nail it down because I find contrary opinions being expressed. Ancient man, even ancient man that believed in all sorts of gods, was not necessarily persuaded of life after death. And so early on, many religious and spiritual attitudes were very much this world in their focus. Now, that appears to be a statement that could be correct or could be incorrect. And I have had a hard time trying to study things from the past to determine just where this concept that we survive death really began to take hold, or if it has always been there or not. I don't know, and I haven't been able to nail it down in a way where I'm satisfied that we've been able to figure it out.
That's an interesting point. I think that I've noticed that even with looking back at the Hebrew Bible, that most of the covenants, the rules and the rewards associated with it were all based on your corporeal life on earth. It doesn't really talk anything about rewards in an afterlife or anything about an afterlife at all. I may be mistaken on that. I'm not a Bible expert or a expert of the Old Testament, but it seemed to me that the entire construct of an afterlife seemed to come up with the New Testament. That's
Well, I think it did come
really
up in
be
the
an
Old
issue.
Testament. I mean, when David says, "And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever," it seems to be an idea that did start to take hold, or at least appears to have taken hold. Whether or not that's what the expression meant or not, I mean, I should, to the end of my days or whatever may have been the meaning of it. But yeah, it doesn't become an absolutely clear concept. We see it in the New Testament, and it's not as if the New Testament invented it either. It seems to be an idea that came to a people who already very much believed in an afterlife. But yeah, otherwise we would have had no kidding, really,
Well, the book of Isaiah and Revelations, as chronologically separate as they may be, both seem to borrow a significant amount from Egyptian mythology. Specifically, when you look at like the throne and the people with heads of lions and eagles, and I forget what the other two animals are. But animal-headed people surrounding a judge or god figure seems to me, at least, to be borrowed from some of the other local mythologies around the origins of the Hebrew and Christian traditions. So, and if you look at the Egyptian mythologies, that lasts, or that's for thousands of years beforehand. They had some sort of ideas of the afterlife, but that seemed to lead or be more attuned to the nobility living on. I don't think they necessarily thought the common people did, but that's me
Yeah.
speculating a lot and throwing out my personal interpretation of things. But it just seems that the afterlife question, it is something that I don't know. You could make an argument on either side for a lot of different ancient religions, but the way I see it is that seems a very likely place where religions would have started in the first place from an anthropological perspective. Um, I can see it's much easier to deal with death, as I mentioned before, if you think that it's not the end. So I can't imagine that that was not one of the earliest ideas of
Right.
religion. And it just took form in different ways throughout time. And I don't know. It's
I
an
would
interesting
think,
question.
yeah, I would think that belief in an afterlife, and I do believe in an afterlife, but I would think that it would just naturally come about eventually in any culture, society, isolated and separated from all other information, just because of hallucinations and near-death experiences. I would think that these would cause people to wonder because of the way that they tend to be experienced. And um, so I would see it as inevitable. And because near death experiences have no doubt been going back as far as culture has, I would expect that it's been a notion, whether or not it was a central notion or not. Hard to tell. And like I said, I've been trying to research it at times, not lately, seriously, but because, but I never got anywhere with when I was trying to look into it. I couldn't establish a certain sense of how that was going.
That's I'd actually take that a step further in saying that the the near-death experiences, the hallucinations aren't even a necessity for it. I mean, yes, they might add to some of the lore and the common themes associated with it through across cultures, but well, and that's something that might tie us back into the prison. Come back to that in a bit, but um, the
It begs the question because of the out of body experience, apparently.
right. Well, I would actually say that the question of afterlife is something that would come up just with people dying, the living experiencing death, watching other people die. It
Yeah.
seems like the kind of thing that just a simple wishful thinking would create.
See,
And whoever would be willing to preach about it and to give affirmation to the hopes of other people seems like a fantastic way to become a prophet or revered in the community if you're willing to commit to um, the prospect to just take on the role of hope giver.
yeah, it
Seems
would
like a
be
fantastic way to
powerful. Yeah.
we do have a viewer question here. It says, um, Greg, what do you suppose you would conclude if you had a near-death experience that included a vision of something that felt like your creator? That's a good question. I have to say that I've read a good amount about near-death experiences, and it's especially an interesting question because I would have a much more significant understanding of it if I experienced something that felt very different from what I would expect in a creator, given the cultural paradigms that I've grown up in. It's interesting that Christians tend to have experiences that are most religions or most people or people of religious backgrounds have similar. the out of body type of feeling, the bright lights, the intense, overwhelming feelings, the warmth, things of that nature. But when you actually have the visions of creators, they tend to fit the archetypes, the culture that you were raised in, which to me leads, or that leads me to believe that it's a psychological manifestation of a hypoxic brain, or a brain undergoing a large surge of the chemical DMT, which is known to be associated with a lot of this. Um, so I would be very much more affected by it if I were to say be introduced to Vishnu, or um, say ancestors that I had never met in some way, but that could trace a lineage, because I'm not part of a culture that includes ancestor worship. So those would be stronger experiences that would be harder for me to explain
Uh-huh.
than experiencing it myself. So, um,
Well, I can identify with that question myself because I've had a near death experience, and for me, now I'm not that familiar with the descriptions of near death experience by people who are not associated with Christianity, or at least in this culture. Never really took a look at it, but for me, the experience was definitely one of being in the presence of a loving, loving God. But as you know, I'm an agnostic theist, and I would agree with you that I don't see anything in my experience that could not be potentially explained as being that hypoxic experience. That couldn't be something that is just related to the great angst of the moment that can occur. So I recognize that this was authentically my experience, but that doesn't require that my experience was necessarily realistic, or in touch with reality. So it I do find it interesting, though, that isn't it interesting that that we should have such an experience hypoxically. What would be the foundation of that? I mean, why don't we have some people dreaming that they're having sex, some people dreaming that they're running up a hill, and other people dreaming that they're involved in their favorite activity, or it's interesting that there's that particular it's probably not 100%, but it's a very strong, large percentage of people who have a near-death experience. It is for them some sort of spiritual experience. So I don't know what to make of it, but there's plenty of argument that could be made to allow for it to be perceived in a variety of different ways.
this is one that I personally have a bit of a question about myself, and have talked to people, and read things and seen documentaries about the chemical DMT. It's called it's dimethyltryptamine, I believe. It's a naturally occurring chemical in our brains, but it also is something that can be found in nature, and I think it's refined through roots of some sort. Basically, it's a drug that people smoke to get high, but it's called the spirit molecule. For the reason behind that being that the descriptions of the trips that people go on, it is a strong hallucinogen, are generally considered to be the most spiritual experiences, and they're very in tune and in line with the experiences described in out of body experiences, near death experiences. They tend to have a, a myriad of um, similarities, as far as the warm feelings, the out of body feeling, as if you can view yourself from outside of the room. You're completely unattached to any sort of corporeal form. You are uh, seeing or feeling great comfort, or I I don't know, because frankly, I'm a pretty straight laced guy. Yeah, a non believer, but the heaviest hitter I've ever really used. Well, I smoked marijuana, and I just said that on
Oh,
live and recorded. internet stream, and I have drank a good amount of alcohol. But that's essentially it for my experiences with drugs. I uh, I know plenty of people who have experimented outside of that, and I have to tell you, it's a huge area of curiosity for me for these reasons that I have no idea what it feels like to hallucinate, to see things that aren't there, and to feel like they're real. And I know that specifically in people of my very inquisitive and atheistic paradigm, we tend to be intrigued by this. And I know there's a good amount of experimentation with hallucinogens in our groups. So that does tie me back a little bit to the original topic I wanted to bring up, though, was crime and punishment. In that I am very curious about these, and I would love to experience that in a controlled environment at some point in my life to understand it better. But doing so would be illegal, and it may very well, first of all, even getting my hands on something like that means I am supporting a criminal lifestyle. Beyond that, I would, if caught, end up facing large fines or even jail time and a criminal record that would preclude me from employment in many different situations. So
By
the
criminal
only
law,
thing I can
you
ask people
mean
is,
officially. I got to be honest with you. I certainly don't think it's appropriate for people to be whiling away their hours stoned or to, live their lives irresponsibly. But I am not convinced that the worry that seems to exist in our culture about certain types of drug use represent the threats. Anything can be overdone, of course, but I really think that even the criminal element here, the war on drugs has created more of a problem for us than drugs have, and not that drugs can't be a problem; they can be. Now, I myself, they never appealed to me. I never, I've never been a drug user. Wild turkey is probably the closest I get.
oh,
I just never appealed to me, and even if it was legal, I doubt that I'd even have the least bit interest in doing it personally. But I like being sober.
yeah, that's it. And for me, it is a curiosity, not seeking high. It's seeking the experience, trying to understand it better. Yeah, for me, it's very much part of my skeptical mind and my inquisitive mind manifesting in that desire, not somebody looking to get to lose the toils of my daily life or anything. But I think you made a fantastic point about people wasting their time and whiling their lives away. I have to tell you, I know plenty of people who do that with television, video games. Um, Plenty of people would say that I do that. I spend a very large amount of time, of my time, on Facebook, having intellectual conversations of different natures with complete strangers. But I view that as a intellectual pursuit and very valuable. So yesterday, I did something that I haven't done in years. I played a video game for about 4 hours while my son took the longest nap of his life, and I felt wrong about it when I was done. That felt bad to me. I lost myself in something, and it just felt gross. I can't describe that. So there's ways to waste your life, no matter if you're doing it with drugs or with some other completely mindless, time-consuming process. But is that a crime? Is that something that we need to punish as a society? Or is it something that we should be addressing maybe more on the social level, trying to find more productive things for
Even when
people,
it's a
encourage them to
social
do
problem, even when it's wrong, it's a personal problem. It's a mental health problem. It's not a crime problem. I don't get that. Turning it into a crime. Particularly with addicts. You know, People who become, if you turn it into a crime. By the way, with video games, my daughter, when she was born, both my wife and I decided we wanted her to know about strong women and women who were decisive and made a huge impact on the world. And we put books in her library, in her, about Eleanor Roosevelt, and just that she discovered these things. One of the things that my daughter and I did is that we went through every single one of the Tomb Raider games together. She would sit on my lap. She's just a little girl at the time, when we started. And by the time, the last Tomb Raider game had come out, she was old enough. She wasn't sitting on my lap. But we went through every single Tomb Raider game, every single chapter and episode, and conquered every single level all the way through all of them. And we did that together. And I'll tell you what, some of the most precious times I spent with my daughter going through that and just having a bunch of time. Was it a waste of time? Well, maybe the game was, but not spending the time with my daughter. And we're fortunate we live in a society where we have the luxury of spending such time. But I'll tell you, that's something that on my dying bed, I will not regret that I spent my time playing Tomb Raider.
And you're absolutely right. Video games, we have a viewer comment here. It says, everyone needs a mindless activity to enjoy from time to time. What's the difference between a good movie and a well-designed video game? And I completely agree. There's another one that says, Greg, you and science are completely wrong. Good video games do exist. And no, well, God, I was about to get to that, and then that comment rolled in. There is such a thing as good video games. I was just arguing for how I would like to try drugs. So I'm not sure that I could really be taken in context at saying that video games are always bad. I'm saying that I felt gross after spending 4 hours playing a video game instead of doing something different. And the video game I was playing, it was, I don't want to endorse a copyrighted product on here, but I was playing as a made-up superhero trying to learn how to use my powers and fly around in a couple of fictional cities doing things that were basically fighting evil robots and stuff. It was not anything that was going to be a mind-blowing experience. But you're right. I mean, the Tomb Raider games were really well done games. I love Assassin's Creed is another game that it's a big puzzle for a lot of it. And video games have aspects that are associated with hand-eye coordination in great ways. And there's some that really make you think and are great storylines. So yes, they can be good.
Yeah.
Any other ones you've played, Bob?
No, not really.
Gamer generation.
Suppose let's see. I'm thinking we both liked Sim Tower, but we played that separately. I used to do Sim City, but it tired of it very quickly. And one that I used to love is Crusader. I used to love that game, Crusader, and Stronghold, things like that. But I haven't played a video game in, I don't know, it's maybe 5 years or something. I just don't have the time for it. But although I just went to the garage the other day and got out a satchel that has all these installed discs on it, I'm thinking I should put some of those in.
I noted this as well on the subject of games in general. Not really video games anymore, but they can be something that are a great bonding experience and a great social activity. And I absolutely value social interaction above most else, probably too much. But I this week am now 1 year without a cable connection to my home. We don't even have an antenna set up on our TV. We do still watch movies and TV shows through some of the online streaming services, but it's no longer the kind of thing where we sit down and see what's on. From now, to watch something, a movie or a show, is a choice that my wife and I make that we want to do together. And it's a specific show for a time frame, not sitting down in front of the TV for 5 hours. I look at these things as, is it a healthy behavior to be doing, or is it something that you're doing far too much of? And that's when we considered our cable. We had a DVR box, and it got to the point where watching things that were recorded in our DVR was part of the to-do list almost. Oh, we've got to take care of that because we have the shows to catch up on. And it got to the point of absurdity. But since that, we play games and we read to each other. I know that sounds ridiculous, but we are two grown adults that read stories to each other, and we love it. It's something that people can do individually, but it's now a social and a bonding experience between me and my wife. We play the game Magic the Gathering, which is a total geek game. My little brother got me into it, and I love it. It uses different aspects of your mind, and you have to be creative in how you do it. I have built about 20 different decks of cards to play with, and it's a wonderful game. Um, and people make fun of us for doing this, and all I can think is, what do you do? Watch TV? So I think everything's in the eye of the beholder there a little bit.
Yeah. No, I spent several years without a TV set of any kind. Um, I'd say like from 1970 until I think about 1984. I didn't even own a TV set. Didn't want one. Um,
Well, there was nothing
just
good on in that period anyway.
yeah. But uh, then I finally got one. I probably watch news or documentaries, and then Netflix. My wife has gotten me involved in watching various movies, and I've learned to appreciate a lot of movies and you know, things like that. I do find that meaningful. But it isn't amazing though that we live in a culture where we have the time to make even sometimes poor decisions in how we use our time. That's amazing. I mean, when I think back years ago when you was working from sun up to sundown just to make sure that the crops were taken care of in the field, you know, taken care of, and the livestock and whatever was going on in the village was. I don't think it was drudgery all the time, but it was a full time job, and
Hmm.
we're very indulged today.
That's you know, there's something to be said for what technology has done to our lives and the ability to free up more of our time. I feel, unfortunately, that it could free up far more of our times if we were to structure our society a touch different. But that's getting into a completely different can of worms. So,
Do you
I
think
guess
this relates to
my comment
crime?
on that. I'm
Do you
sorry.
think this relates to crime? I mean, when you think about it, look at all the free time we do have. But those of us fortunate enough to have found our niche in society, we work, we play, we obtain things, and then we have all this time to goof off. And there's other people who, in the disadvantages that they're dealing with and the anger that they might feel, um, they have nothing but free time, you know, sometimes. And I wonder how much crime existed in the ancient cultures where, you know, pretty much not only did everyone have to work from sun up to sundown, but everyone had something to do. It wasn't as if you ever had to. You don't find people in the year, say 50 AD, thinking, you know, well, I wonder what I'm going to do with my life. I don't know, you know, what I'm going to do. There was so much to do that just, you know, just pitch in. And that's not the way our culture works now. People can't just voluntarily pitch in. They have to walk through the hoops. They have to get the education. They have to get the credentials. They have to develop the social skills. They have to, you know, and and for people who have gone through that disadvantage, haven't had the opportunity, the education, come from a culture or a subculture or a neighborhood where there's a great deal of despair and hopelessness, these people are not going to be acclimated and socialized and brought into that kind of ongoing thing. And of course, they're going to turn to crime.
Right. There's something to be said about having the right skill set for a particular function. And unfortunately, with a lot of what we've done, particularly with our urban cultures and our treatment of crime in youths, and our investment in education and in programs for children in poor families and disadvantaged youth. The way I look at it is we expect them to come out and be productive members of society, but that's like expecting somebody to walk into a blacksmith's forge without a hammer or any tools and saying, get to work. If you don't equip somebody properly, if they don't have the right education and the right tools, they're simply not going to be able to do the job that you expect of them. So that has a lot to do with crime as well as what other choices do some of these people have when you come out. And you know what I can say is that the people who commit the least amount of petty crimes and of violent crimes, aside from domestic violence, that's a completely separate animal. But the crimes that victimize strangers, petty theft, I'm not talking about white collar or even grand theft. Um, you know what demographic does the least of that? People who have decent paying full time jobs who can provide for their families. Um,
Yeah. I
if
love
we
the
want
movie
to
Fun with Dick
reduce
and Jane.
crime, that's probably the best thing we can do.
Yeah. You saw the movie Fun with Dick and Jane. I think that's the name of it.
I did.
Uh, it was, very tongue in cheek, of course, but you point out that, um, which I think this comes from the hopelessness. You think about it. Even today, I teach sound engineering, and I got to tell you this. I love it. It's a great job. I get to teach. I love working with students. But something I have to be honest about is I don't wake up in the morning and look at the world and say, the world has sound engineering problems and I need to be a sound engineer and take care of these things. Um, there's a sense in which this is a sublimated, advanced, and complexly built upon sense of purpose. And we don't have in our society today a sense of purpose that seems to be directly related and relevant to the issue of being alive. And and I think that we have to, therefore, in our culture, find a way in which we make this route towards a relevant sense of purpose when we're finally going to have a job. And then there has to be a job there to have. And I really don't think that our current culture is set up in a way that is honest enough to admit, even if everybody who could get a job really wanted a job, we don't have jobs for them.
Mm-mm.
And so
And part of that
we,
it has to do with our understanding of free time, and what a full time job really entails. I'm getting off onto my political tack a little bit, but why is 40 hours a full time job? How arbitrary is that? The way I look at it is
what
what is the
job?
cost? I'm sorry.
I didn't hear what you said. What job? Why is it a full time
Oh,
job?
why is 40 hours considered a full-time job? That is an arbitrarily set number for 8 hours a day. It's a third of your day is what they picked that on. A third of your
Right.
day for sleeping, a third of the day for working, and a third of the day for leisure. Seemed like a fair enough understanding at the time, but the way I see a full-time job is however many hours need to be worked by society at large to get the job done, the total amount of people, divided by how many people are that want to work. If we come to a point where there's a labor shortage, a 45 to 50 hour work week doesn't seem like a bad idea. But right now we are in the opposite ballpark. So maybe a 30-hour work week would be a better idea. Um, just throwing that
Mhm.
idea out there. That you're absolutely right. There's not enough jobs to deal with everybody that we have. So maybe we need to take a look back at why there aren't as many jobs and why we work the amount of hours that we do for a completely arbitrary reason. But that may be a completely uh, different discussion that we have to have a different day.
And then, of course, I have flex time where there's certain hours I need to be in class and teaching or lecturing or leading through a lab and things like that. And then there's other time which is entirely up to me. When am I grading papers? When am I um, putting together my lectures, or looking at lesson material, assessing the work of students? A lot of this is done at other times. And the truth is, I probably spend 2 to 3 hours outside of class for every hour in class, but where does that hour come from? That's entirely flexible. And, then there's the other things that I do that are related to what I teach. And sometimes it's even hard to tell, well, where's the work? Where's the not work? And sometimes if it gets too, I'd be honest with you, sometimes if it gets too unstructured, I can get just kind of lost in spinning my wheels.
I understand that. My wife is a teacher as well, and I wanted to when you mentioned you doing what you do. You said you're a sound engineer, or you teach sound engineering, and that doesn't really give you in every way, or you don't feel like there's a sound engineering problem out there that you're helping to solve, and it's a different kind of fulfillment. But I want to beg to differ to some extent, Bob. Is what you do at work is what you do to make a living. It's what you do to survive. But what you do outside of work is you're the unconventional pastor. You're a co-host on a show that I carry, and you do 2 hours of your own show every week, as well as appearing on other shows. And you do this all. I mean, we're not paid to do these shows. This is completely volunteer work, because this is the stuff, at least in my life, that gives it real meaning. This is where I do see that we have a skeptical thinking problem. We have a religion problem. We have a intolerance problem. And these are the things that I really see as my job, my calling in life, outside of what somebody wants to pay me to do. So if anybody wants to pay me to do this full time, that'd be fantastic. But until then, I'll work when I can get it. I don't know. It just it seems like when you talk about what you do as your job, it seems to me that what you do as your hobby outside of your job is a lot more indicative of who you really are.
Perhaps, yeah. But of course, we couldn't do this on the air if we didn't have sound engineers designing the equipment, deciding how it's to be done and put together and stuff like that. So I suppose that it's relevant. But of course, what I meant by that is that when I look at when I wake up in the morning and I look at the world, I see people who have needs for housing, people who have needs for food, people who have need for clothing, people who have need for each other. And I just am fortunate enough to live in a world where we also want to hear things and we also want to broadcast things. And so people like me have something to do that we find fascinating because of the technology. And I'm not complaining in the least because I love this stuff. But there's a sense in which it's kind of a actualized profession in some sense, because it's not as if it's a primary need of human beings to create recordings,
No, and it is something that manifests in its own form of passion as well. I will absolutely agree with you there. I mean, if anybody wants to argue that a simple passion for doing something great can never accomplish anything, I challenge you to take a look at Linux and all of the kernels and the programs that people have written out there for free entirely, that just because that's what they want to do. So yes, there's so many different things that can be done in so many different ways to improve our lives and to improve the lives of other people around us. But Bob, we've got about a minute and a half left. And I wanted to close on just one last thing. First of all, we did have another viewer comment that I wanted to touch on. It's there have been legal studies with psilocybin toxin, the chemical found in magic mushrooms, where lots of people claim to have life-changing divine experiences. These studies happened some years ago, and recently such studies have been allowed under some circumstances, as such experiences may have positive medical or psychological effects, according to some hypotheses. As a matter of fact, I have read up on that quite a bit. I know that psilocybin toxin is very strongly associated with life-altering decisions. People who are strong drug addicts in other ways, there are other drugs, heroin, cocaine, or alcoholics have other major decisions that need to be made. In controlled environments, they can really help people step outside, take a look at their life, and objectively, albeit under the influence of a powerful hallucinogenic chemical, which sounds odd, but objectively take a look at themselves and say, I'm going down the wrong path, and they can change it, and it's incredible the power of that. It also works really well for cluster headaches, I've been told, or I've read. So yes, there are absolutely medicinal and therapeutic uses to several of the different drugs that are out there. I also like to point out that caffeine in its pure form is a white powder that is strongly addictive and a powerful stimulant. Sound like any other drugs you know of? So a lot of this is in the eye of the beholder, and a lot of crime and our understanding of crime is in the eye of the beholder as well. And I think that we as a society need to take a step back and objectively look at what values we are using to determine what is a crime or what should be considered a crime and what shouldn't. I propose that we take humanistic values and look at the consequences of it, the damage or the harm done, and specifically to people other than yourself by these actions. And that's how we can decide what a crime really is. Um, I do have a one last quote that I wanted to end with. This is a professor that I mentioned last week, and I was going to throw this quote out there last week, but I think it's more appropriate now. This is a Dr. Andrew Austin, a very influential person in my life, who made it very clear to me on this subject exactly what crime is and what a criminal is. When he stated that we could make nearly everybody on earth a criminal today if we made masturbation illegal. On that note, this has been Inspiring Honesty. Join us again next week at 6 o'clock. And stay tuned for The Unconventional Pastor coming up next with Bob Graves.